Greetings and salutations, friends. Character NPC back at the gaming table, continuing through the Invasion Malta playthrough tutorial stuff. I want to go through a complete turn in this video, so I hope I don't rush through it too fast or it doesn't become too long. But in this one, I'm going to go through a complete, in fact, turn one of the Invasion Leros Scenario 4. To begin with, you should always go through the scenario and look at the specific rules. There's always some unique circumstances and special rules for each one of the scenarios, so it's important that you really get into the details here. And since we're choosing Scenario 4, Leros 1943, I'm just going to start by looking at the required components. The Leros map, of course, we have on the table, the Allied setup card for Scenario 4, and the Axis setup card for Scenario 4. You can see it tells you the game length, it's full 11 turns, and the placement of the Allied motor pool marker is a maximum of 2. It also talks about weather there. We'll get into that as we play through this, but this section is great, the background, but I'm not going to go through that in detail. You can read through it for yourself. It's important to note here in the first turn that the scenario starts with an amphibious invasion. You're not going to get a choice. The Axis is going to complete an amphibious invasion, and the Axis player chooses which invasion zone before the Allied player places his units. 4:14 is referenced here. Play begins after the Allied player has completed his placement. I've mentioned in some of my other videos that is not that it has to be decided before any units are placed, and I'll go through that in a moment. It is specific, but we're going to use Rule 4:14 for this. I'm going to go through a bit more here. The Axis player chooses either the Ost, which means east in German, or West formation to activate. It conducts a ground sequence with an amphibious invasion. Its activation marker then goes into the opaque cup for regular activation later on in game turn 1, along with the activation markers that was not chosen. So basically it's saying all the activation markers go into the pool for game turn 1. So this first turn is really an invasion turn and a complete surprise. And it's the only thing that happens in what they're calling the first turn. So whichever group is chosen, Ost or West, that Kampf group on the Axis side is going to get 2 turns, you might say. There'll only be one strategic segment, but operational segments wise, they're going to get 2 activations for that particular formation. A paradrop is allowed during its regular formation draw, game turn 1 or 2, but you'll also note here it says only one group, parachute, or convoy can activate in a single activation from the setup card. Units of that formation already on land will also activate. So you'll see how that comes into play later on. But when you have 6 convoys, let's say, that's not the case here. Let's say you've got 2 or 3 convoys here that can all come in game turn 1, along with paradrops that can be done. This is limiting that to 1 paradrop or convoy per activation. The Allied convoys as well is a bit unique. 2 Allied reinforcement groups are not available until the game turn shown for each group. They move to the map by naval transport. Each is a separate convoy. They do not require an invasion zone marker. So basically, they're landing automatically is the way they're setting this up. They arrive at a port. Because it's an Allied port, the booms, the naval booms that would normally block an Axis player are moved, and they just travel to the port. A convoy can activate only during night turns. It arrives automatically. Do not use the convoy arrival table. That's important because on the setup card it says to use the arrival, or they're subject to the arrival table, but that is not the case. This overrides that. We'll go into that in more detail later as well. Special Axis situations. All Axis units are trained for amphibious invasion. That's important as a die roll modifier for landings if in another scenario where not everyone is trained who's doing the amphibious invasions. The Ju-88 air units cannot conduct close air support. Bases are too far away, so that limits them to only strategic bombing. And paradrops use drift table B for both Kampfgruppes. They drop complete. Do not drop them into multiple hexes. So if you saw my last video on paradrops, in this case, because the way the scenario is set up, you would use the drift table, but instead of going from number that you roll and down to all the different hexes, they just drop in the single drop hex based on one roll from the drift chart. Units just dropped cannot move more than one hex during their movement phase. All can conduct combat during the combat phase, so that's also important. It's really interesting to me to think about what all could be done with paradrops, in that they might conduct some drift combat and then also move one hex and attack an objective hex or something like that. I don't know. I haven't really worked through all of that in my head yet. Reorganizing Axis convoys. This is important because there is no box on the map for the holding boxes for invasions. We'll get to that in a little bit, but you can see here in this invasion zone there are no holding boxes. While over here I have an example of the Malta map. Here is the Zona Larnica holding box, in particular the available and the delayed. And you use the convoy reorganization box instead if things are delayed in the amphibious landing. We'll go through that in detail as well. So in that, all units receive a delayed result from the convoy arrival table can return to the setup box corresponding to their formation. These units are now in a new convoy starting during the recovery phase, so the sequence is a little different as well. They are not added to other convoys, so they remain their own convoy in that reorganization box. Each reorganized convoy can contain units of only one formation plus army units, so they can keep their attachments, but basically you're not going to be trying to intermingle other delayed units into the box. It's going to have to stay the way that it was when it first launched, pretty much. Assign a new invasion zone marker during the next recovery phase. A reorganized convoy is not available for naval transport until it has an invasion zone marker. So there's still those requirements and potential delays. New convoy is subject to the convoy arrival table again upon activation. And then there's the convoy 3 units. The Axis player can assign these to any convoy for convoy arrival. They're talking about this particular little unit. It's its own little thing of these elite commandos. And then beyond that, we have the victory conditions. The Axis player wins if he holds friendly any 6 victory locations, with in addition the sudden victory 19.2. If we go and we look at 19.2, it's actually 19.22. The Axis player wins scenario 4 immediately at the end of any turn by controlling Leros hex 2706. So that happens to be where this headquarters is. Okay, there is a designer's note here stating that historically the Axis won and they captured this listed set of hexes. Those are all the ones in this middle sector. Okay, so let's get started. First off, the required components I mentioned. We have the map already out here. We have the Invasion Leros map. We need the Allied setup card. I have the Allied setup card already out here, and you can see that the units for at start Group A have already been removed. I'll mention where they are in a moment, but all the at start Group B units are laid out and all the reinforcements and everything. And then Axis Scenario 4 player setup card, all of the air units, all of their formations, and of course the convoy reorganization box. You'll also need these particular, that's a little bright there, you'll also need these particular north, west, east, and south convoy invasion zone markers. They say convoy on the other side. These are what will be used to decide on where a particular convoy is going to go. You'll need some attack objective markers, some disrupted markers, some Axis beachhead markers. There are Italian ones. These are the German ones. The harbor boom destroyed marker. I wish there were more of these. I could only find one. And the storm weather, windy weather, to document the weather. Game turns 1 and 2 are automatically good weather. Use the Leros weather table each turn starting game turn 3. So we have our units. We've set our marker for game turn 1, which is the AM morning turn for November 12th. And we have the motor pool marker set at 2. We know we're going to be good weather. Okay, so we have all the components that we need and we're ready to begin. And of course it says here that it starts with an amphibious invasion. The Axis player chooses either the Ost or the West formation to activate 712 and conducts a ground sequence. But the invasion zone markers need to be placed by the Axis player before the Allied player places his units. Rule 4:14. Play begins after the Allied player has completed his placement. So let's look at Rule 4:14. So 4:14 is a part of the sequence under 4.0 playing the game. We've just gone through the beginnings of preparing for play. Choose the scenario. We did that. The Leros scenario 4. Set up, align the map. We did that. Set up the scenario cards. We did that. All units begin the game at full strength, and some units may start disrupted. Not all units are used in every scenario. Actually, in this scenario, there are units that are not in full strength. Specifically, the Allies. Those two units are at a reduced strength at the beginning, so the setup cards and the scenarios are what overrules everything in that regards. Next, 4:14, as it mentions, unit and markers placement procedure. Follow the sequence below for all scenarios. Play begins at the conclusion of step 6. Step 1. Step 1, place markers. Place the turn marker on the game turn 1 box on the turn record chart. We did that. Place the motor pool marker on the motor pool track. See scenario setup. We did that. Initial placement. The Allied player examines the at start section of his setup card. Allied units are divided into two groups, Group A and Group B. He now places Group A units on their designated historical locations. There is no placement option about Group A. That's been completed. Step 3, invasion zone markers. Invasion zone markers for each of his naval transport convoys. The Axis player chooses an invasion zone marker and places it on the indicated box on his setup card. The Allied player cannot examine them. So, here we are at the beginning of turn 1. The Allied player has placed all of the units on the map that are a part of Group A, which really, if you look at them, represents a lot of the static units, the artillery, the border artillery around the edge of the island. They're shooting out to sea, and a whole lot of zero movement type units. So it's kind of like, what would the Axis already have intelligence and seen over the air, flying over and such, recon. So those have been placed. Now, the Axis player gets to choose the invasion zones for these Kampfgruppe that will be invading first few turns. And what I did in my solo playthrough, because there were only 4 zones, I took a four-sided die and rolled to see north being 1, east being 2, south being 3, and west being 4. You can do it that way. I think this time what I want to do is I'm going to choose the west invasion zone, and that gives me enough area and destinations with some clear terrain here and roads that I'm going to use west for all of them, or the majority of them. So west it is, and what I would do is take these and put them on the invasion zone marker box. Specifically, I want Ost because I'm going to choose to use them in my initial invasion. And then I'm also going to choose some future invasion zones for these other convoys. But this is Kampfgruppe West, you can see. And Kampfgruppe Kuna, this paradrop, I think I'm going to do in between the time that it takes to get all of these invasions done. So you can see some of them are later in the game, 4, 5, and 6. And there's going to be some delays for sure. I mean, there's no doubt about it. So I'm going to use Invasion Zone East in this case because I like the way some of these areas in here might give me an opportunity for a quick gain on some of the victory hexes there, and specifically the sudden victory hex. So I'm going to choose, in addition, the East Invasion Zone, and I'm going to put the markers for Kampfgruppe West for the East Invasion Zone. I'll go ahead and place another West for this reserve here. And that only leaves this one Special Forces that could come with one of these others, but I think I'm going to hold him off and probably put him in with one of these other reorganization convoys, because while they can't reorganize and change between East and West, this is an army unit, and these Special Forces could come in with a reorganized unit. So I think that's the way I'm going to do that. You also see there's a little bit of reinforcements up here for Kampfgruppe Ost, and of course, as I mentioned, Kampfgruppe Kuna. They're a subordinate group to Kampfgruppe West. Okay, so the net result of this is that I now have all of my invasion zones picked out for each one of my individual convoys. They are laid out. They can be changed during each of the recovery phases, so you can only change them at the end of a game turn. Okay, now that the invasion zone markers have been placed, this choice precedes placement of Allied Group B units on the map. So now the Allied player places all of the Group B units in their hexes. I'm going to use the historical setup here. Okay, and so now Group B has been deployed. You can see they're no longer here. With Group B of the Allied player setup card completed, we're ready to move on. The Axis player transfers all air units to be used for close air support missions for the turn from the setup card to an opaque cup. At the start of any AM or PM, this is one time and the only time I believe where the rules actually mention AM morning and PM night. So usually AM is activation marker, but in this case, at the start of any AM or PM turn, he can choose to conduct air bombardment prior to the first activation and places these units in the air bombardment box. So I've placed these over in the ready box from the player setup card here. Put them in the ready box, and it goes on with choosing the air units. I'm not going to do that yet. Next would be activation markers. Activation markers of both players go into the same opaque cup, the same one as the air units for the random draw. They're talking about the close air support they mentioned above. Finally here you can see final land placement. Allied player places all Group B units as desired, but no more than one infantry type unit of Group B per hex. So we've already done that. We're basically able to now start the game. Again, it mentions scenario special rules, optional rules. The scenario special rules are the most important. It's really telling you everything that's going to take place and how it takes place. Once placement is complete, play begins. Play follows a sequence of play, obviously. We know that the first turn is going to start with an amphibious invasion by the Axis player, and that the units that are activated to conduct that amphibious landing are going to take their activation marker and put it in the cup for drawing of a regular activation later in game turn 1. So in effect, whichever is chosen is going to have 2 activations during turn 1. Alright, we also note that the Axis units are trained and that the Ju-88 units cannot conduct close air support. That's the most relevant right here at the beginning. We're going to deal with that right at the very beginning of the turns. Okay, so we're ready to begin.